This presentation on providing feedback to your online and distance learners has been created as part of a series of professional development videos from Intermediate District 287 to help support teachers in their journey into online and distance learning. Feedback is something we've always naturally done for our students. Oftentimes it can be done with a look or an expression, but in the online and digital format, we want to make sure we keep a few things in mind. Make sure you provide it often and immediately if possible. The technology we choose can help assist us with that. We want to make sure there's adequate time for reflection and revision, and make sure that we include progress indicators wherever we can. Providing effective feedback supports learners, increases completion, speeds up that completion, facilitates the teacher presence, and helps us build relationships with our students. The reason I put this part here about the video games is to highlight the fact that so many learners in this country are playing video games, and what makes video games successful is that immediate feedback that is provided so often as gamers are learning new skills to progress through the games. Some important traits to remember when giving feedback is to keep it one-to-one when possible, which means not general to the entire group, but specific to that learner. Be specific in your feedback. Make sure we're assessing the task and not the behavior. We don't want to do things like dock a grade if the assignment is late. That doesn't tell us what a student knows or what kind of skills they have related to the topic. That's an indication of a behavior. So we want to have two different mechanisms for reporting that. Keep in mind that step-based feedback is close to human feedback. Step-based feedback in an online platform may be something that is automated by the system that's providing feedback indicators as students are moving through an assignment. Also, it's important to keep in mind that there are positive and negative effects associated with different kinds of feedback. You want to make sure that you're praising learners for their effort, not for their intelligence. Be specific in your feedback. Feedback on formative assessments is important because it allows the learner time to make adjustments before they're given a grade with maybe a little more consequence. Allowing students to self-report and provide feedback is important as well. When you ask students to provide some self-assessment of their learning, it's possible they may lie to you and say they did a great job or assign themselves an A. But the reality is, they can't lie to themselves. They know if they've done a good job or not, and they know how easily the skills came to them. So while they may not be completely honest with you, the feedback they're actually giving themselves while they're writing will help them progress in their learning. Try to avoid more general feedback like saying, "good job," or waiting a few days to grade an assignment, especially in the online setting, where having that feedback come in quickly happens in time to allow the learner to make some adjustments. If we offer students empty praise, they become more disengaged with the class and the content, and they may not perform as well as the course moves forward. We want to think about equity while we're providing feedback. All of us will provide feedback on written work that students submit to us. Keep in mind this study, From Breaking the Cycle of Mistrust, Wise Interventions to Provide Critical Feedback Across the Racial Divide. One group of students was given the feedback on writing assignments that was prefaced with this: "I'm giving you these comments because I have very high expectations and I know that you can reach them." And then they were given the feedback on their writing. The control group just saw this message: "I'm giving you these comments so that you'll have feedback on your paper." Try to guess which group submitted revisions at a higher percentage and did better in subsequent assignments. Because there may be more asynchronous feedback being offered to students, we want to make sure, when possible, to use the student's name while we're addressing them, and keep in mind some of those netiquette tips that we use when we are writing emails. Don't use caps or bold. Avoid the use of highlighting, as that may violate color contrast guidelines for those with visual impairments, like color blindness. Make sure that we're grammar and spell checking our work. Consider the relationship with the learner. There may be times when using emojis is okay for more informal kinds of interactions, but when giving feedback, it may be something you want to avoid. Also, be careful of the use of sarcasm with your learners. That doesn't always translate well when there's no other written context to help inform the learner that this was sarcasm or a joke. In fact, some of your learners may not have the ability to interpret sarcasm even if there was some additional context. Be mindful of your learners' communication styles. If possible, while using a learning management system, you can set up some automated feedback options for your learners. This kind of automation will help your learners progress through the course and feel more supported, adding to that teacher presence in the class. Any force that guides a student through the content is going to assist them as they're making their way through the learning pathway. If you're using a quiz, consider multiple choice, matching, true-false questions, sometimes short answer, those things that the system can grade on its own and provide immediate feedback. Using the interactive H5P modules have all kinds of opportunities to provide students with interesting progress indicators and real-time feedback. If you're using the Moodle Learning Management System, look into your completion tracking settings and the lesson module for other forms of automated feedback and progress indicators. All of those modules just mentioned will allow you to customize the feedback based on learner response. It's not just important to give feedback on right or wrong or how many points they received, but having some actual text feedback that supports the answer, even if the answer was wrong, can help assist that learner in developing mastery of the content. Perhaps the user guessed and got the right answer. Even providing the feedback reinforcing why that answer was correct can be helpful. If the answer was incorrect, consider placing feedback in the course that allows the learner to see where that information was provided. We have an example in a course where a teacher had created a page demonstrating how students should submit their assignments, and she was noticing that students still weren't submitting assignments appropriately. So when we looked at the logs, we noticed that only 14% of students were even accessing that assignment. Just by the act of including a progress indicator so that the page would automatically check off when a student completed the viewing of the page, we increased the completion to 99% with no other additional changes to the content. Often students will perform their tasks and move through content just to get the check marks filled out in the boxes. It's even better when those check marks fill in automatically upon the student action. You may want to consider setting a passing score for the assignments that students submit, because that way the check marks show up as green if they earn a passing grade and red if they don't. We've seen students go back and resubmit assignments just so that they can get all green check marks, even when they're not required to do so. They're not doing it for a grade, they're doing it because they need to see that line of green check marks moving down the course. There was a study done where a coffee shop gave out customers a buy 10 get 1 free punch card. Customers would buy 10 cups of coffee, get their punch cards, they'd come in and redeem the card for a free cup of coffee. They gave another set of customers buy 12 get 1 free, with the first two already punched in. The groups with the buy 12 get 1 free filled their cards up faster and more frequently. The use of progress indicators in your class can provide some real-time feedback to students so that when they do something, they see something. That kind of progress matters. It has been said that 80% of students that don't pass an online class never even attempted their first assignment. Think about the indicators of progress that you can add to your course to help encourage students as they're working their way through their learning pathway. So let's move on to a different kind of feedback loop now. We're going to talk about self-quizzing a little bit and using quizzing as a method of helping your learners through content. In virtually all areas of learning, you build better mastery when you use testing as a tool. As we consider formative assessments, also consider the fact that providing feedback on summative assessments may be too late. The students don't always have time to go back and make any additional changes and may not even be able to resubmit. We want to use quizzes as a teaching tool, not just for assessment. So by including that automated and response-based feedback, we're allowing the users to see how well they're doing in real time. It's important that we provide opportunities for repeated retrieval, because that's what improves long-term retention. What we're hoping to get at with the idea of frequent quizzing in your courses is to identify gaps in knowledge, producing better organization of knowledge, providing feedback to instructors, causing students to learn even more from their next study episode, improving the transfer of knowledge to new contexts, and encouraging students to study. So here we have a chart that outlines the different types of review teachers might ask their students to do when working in a particular context. We might have students reread assignments so that they can hopefully soak in more of that information. You may have them go over it with a highlighter and highlight for important parts and details. Another popular method of reviewing is asking students to summarize the work that they've already read. And the last one involves quizzing as review. As demonstrated in the chart, quizzing outperforms all of the other often used techniques. In fact, some of them, like highlighting or just having students reread, may result in negative outcomes for your learners. It's important to recognize that quizzing for memory retention is long-lasting. There are a number of studies that have been done to verify the effect persisting after long intervals, all the way from 2 to 4 weeks after, up to 5 years. So let's look at how you might set up your quizzes now to become an effective way of reviewing material for your students and use quizzes as a teaching tool. Consider the fact that testing interrupts forgetting. The more students are asked to recall information, the less they have a chance to forget what they've learned. We want to make sure that when students are learning material, that when they move on to a new unit, they don't simply just forget what they've already learned and think it's no longer important. We'll keep bringing those terms up again and again. So if you have moved on to Unit 2 in your course, don't forget to bring up questions from Unit 1. In Unit 3, you would ask questions from Units 1 and 2. And so on and so on. Lots of check-ins with frequent low-stakes quizzes in class help instructors verify the students are learning as well as they appear to be. Again, we want to get at the idea of cumulative quiz design so that we keep reinforcing the fact that everything a student is learning in your course is important for them to remember and may assist them in the skills that they need to perform later on. And so here's one thing that I think is particularly important. Just by including one test retrieval practice in a class yields a large improvement in the final exam score. The more you integrate these low-stakes frequent quizzes, the more the gains continue to increase. So while you may not have time to completely redesign your course to include all kinds of quizzes, just get started with one. And as you work through the material and as you design new materials for your course, include this method as part of your design. So here's the trick for teachers, and this is where kind of the art of writing good quiz questions comes in. You want to make sure that the students have to struggle somewhat to get the answer, but not too much. So there's a really fine line here that you're walking. The student needs to put some kind of effort into retrieving the answer. That's what helps it stick in their long-term memory. If the answer is too easy, they may not take it seriously, and it isn't really anything they've had to work to retrieve. If the question is too hard and the student struggles and then never gets the right answer, that can actually have a detrimental effect. So it's important to really be mindful of your learners and where you think they fall into that zone of proximal development. Self-quizzing is also important when asking students to review and reflect on previous material. Simply asking students to go over their notes will not result in as much of a benefit as students who are doing self-quizzing, writing questions for themselves based on the material and then coming up with those answers. There is some indication that multiple choice quiz formats are just as, if not more valuable than short answer questions. Short answer questions can be a little more problematic. It's not always easy for a system to grade them automatically and provide that immediate feedback the way multiple choice questions can. And in fact, if research demonstrates that multiple choice quizzing is just as effective, we might as well go with the one that allows students immediate feedback. In a typical classroom using typical vendor content, you'll often see that the course is broken up into very distinct chapters or units with quizzes and tests that come at the end. But that's not what the science suggests that we should do. We want the quizzes to build off of each other, the way we've seen demonstrated. Again, when a student reaches Unit 2, we also want to pull in questions from Unit 1. When they reach Unit 3, we're pulling in questions from Units 1 and 2, and so on. And the idea of quizzing a student at the end of a chapter using these formative assessments isn't as valuable as providing short, frequent quizzes throughout the unit. We're always looking for ways to improve feedback to our learners. If you have other ideas, please reach out and share them so that they can be added in our resources page. Focus on what you can, collaborate with others, share your quiz questions. The idea here isn't perfection. We want to add layer upon layer as you are able to. These resources should never be considered finished, but a continual work in progress.